Hello and welcome back to Bold Moves. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Wanjiru Kihusa. I am the host. Today, I want to venture into an area that I haven't spoken too much about, and this is my motherhood journey. And what prompted this is that my son is turning 8 in a week. And it's sort of given me this opportunity to reflect, to think about what it has been being his mom and being a mom generally, and to sort of go back to my journey towards wanting to become a mom and until the point where he was born and how those last 8 years have looked like. So in this episode, I'll just share very raw personal stories regarding my parenting journey and some of the stuff that I've learned along the way, questions I've asked other people, things I've picked up from the internet that I have tried, tested, and by the way, those work. I don't know too much about the hacks that haven't worked. I want to just talk about the ones that worked for me. To start with, let me just say that because it took me so long to get a child, the moment I had one, there was this deliberateness, the intentionality to parent that sort of came with it. Let me take a step back. So for those who know me personally, know my story with child loss. So my husband and I did lose our first daughter at 21 weeks of pregnancy. She was born. I went on to have a delivery, but she was born when she had already passed on. And then we had a miscarriage soon after, and then a blocked tubes diagnosis. Like both my fallopian tubes were blocked permanently, irreparably, and the doctor actually did recommend that we try IVF, which we did. And we did one IVF cycle, and unfortunately that failed. And it was such a horrendous emotional and physical journey. And I think I've spoken about this in my YouTube channel many years ago, but I've talked about my IVF journey. And that didn't work. There was actually a time when we had adoption papers in the house and had begun to discuss what if. And then just by sheer miracle, we conceived without knowing, without expecting it. After 5 years of this journey of trying to get a child, we got pregnant, which was awesome. Pregnancy after loss, maybe I should do that episode one day, but it is a whole other journey. Having been here before, having been in a place where you had been told, ma'am, there's no heartbeat, having been at a place where you'd gone to the washroom, to the loo, and wiped and seen blood. Pregnancy after loss is very, very intense. I actually did have a rather difficult pregnancy towards the end. I was on bed rest for about 2 months, so it was generally a very very intense journey. And then on June 2nd, 2017, our son Keith was born at around 1 a.m. And he turned our life upside down in all the amazing ways you could think about. And so, again, having wanted a baby for so long and not being able to have one, and then getting to this place where I did have a child, there was this feeling of, oh my God, I have to be so intentional. Like there's this new appreciation, and I've said this before, where, even if he was teething at night, not to say, but then not to romanticize motherhood, especially the fourth trimester, I struggled greatly. I had a ton of baby blues. It's still to date the hardest thing I've ever had to do, including the losses. Like I say that parenting and motherhood is to date the hardest thing I've had to do. And I have done very, very hard things, even in terms of my job. And so not sort of to over romanticize motherhood, but I feel like because it took so long to get here, I had this whole new appreciation for it. There were moments where I would sort of just pep talk myself and remind myself to be joyful in it. And so I am so grateful that I got to be super intentional and deliberate from the get-go. And whether that looked like, having an app, tracking the pregnancy, going online and, just checking out what are the milestones, what should an 8-month-old be doing, how are we doing on that? Like just listening to other moms who had gone through this journey before, talking about the hacks they had. Back then, we were raising our child, we were in Kenya. So some of those things I'd watched would not be relevant to me, when moms talked about, getting a nice pram that folds easy, that you can put in the back of your car and you can lift your baby without waking them up. I was like, maybe not, because the neighborhood in which I lived, I never really needed to ever use a pram. I was using also public transport sometimes. And so again, those hacks, some of them didn't work out, but it was always great to hear what other moms have gone through, things that have worked for them. And I have taken sort of this into my mothering journey throughout. Just one, looking online. I feel like, we are, of course, in the information age, in the knowledge age. There's a ton of information. Just this week, my husband created a reading plan for my son using ChatGPT. He's reading a book, and so he went in there. My son is reading a book, and so my husband went into ChatGPT and said, this number of chapters, create a good reading plan to beginning to the end of this book. And that chart is taped to our fridge. And so my son knows whether today he's reading 3 chapters or 4 chapters, but it's the information age. Everything we need to know is out there. And so I've always, had that attitude, but also just that intentionality and the deliberateness, the realization that I've never done this before and nobody has prepped me for this. So let me read, let me gather as much information as possible, filtering out the stuff that doesn't make sense in my household, that is not really in alignment with my faith or our values, and then just taking what is relevant for me and our family. And so I soon realized quite quickly, maybe not too quickly, but I realized at some point that my son would be an only child. And probably that's not something I want to go into right now, maybe another day. But I quickly started to ask myself, because I'm from a family of 5, we're a big family. My husband is an only child, and he's turned out to be a very well-adjusted adult. But there's a part of me that actually struggled with the idea that our son was not going to have siblings. And for me, siblings have really shaped my life. My brothers have, shown me how to cook. My brothers have, it's actually our second-born brother, who unfortunately passed away about 4 years ago, that taught me how to do dishes, literally wash cups and rinse them out, like the basic stuff, So, and then I have really, really close sisters. My relationship with my sisters is extremely close, so much so that they're my best friends. And they've shaped my relationship with money, shopping. I have worn clothes that were hand-me-downs, but also I think I also inherited some sense of style from them. But I feel like my life has been very much influenced. Conflict resolution. You couldn't go angry for long in our household. People would coax you out of any mood swings you were having. Like, I felt like all of that built me into this amazing person. Yes. And I was worried that my son would, as an only child, miss out on that. And so what I did was I began to ask others. I actually asked my mother-in-law. I went to my mother-in-law and I said, I look at how you've raised your son and I'm impressed. I'm truly impressed, in the sense that he's an only child and he's not spoiled. He's not full of himself. And how did you do it? And then I went and asked a couple of colleagues, some who, like, I remember this lady, we were at a volunteer activity, still while already was working for UPS, and we're in Dubai, and her daughter, whose college going, was there volunteering with us at a school for disabled children. And, she was so engaged. And again, I went to this colleague friend of mine and I asked, hey, how did you manage to raise such a well-adjusted daughter who is really keen on what's going on in the world, serving other people, and she looked like she's social enough. How did you do it? And she shared with me something that I have tried to implement and do. And she said, because she soon realized that the marriage she was in could not manage another child. They were not doing very well in their marriage. She did end up getting remarried later on, but she quickly saw that this was not a marriage that could manage another child. And so she decided from that point that she would raise her daughter to be social and kind and thoughtful. And how to do it is she deliberately became her daughter's friend, sort of auntie. She was the one who picked sometimes the kids from school, her daughter and her friends, and took them for ice cream. She said, I realized I had a little bit more time than other moms, just by virtue that I had only one child. And I also realized that I had a little bit more wiggle room financially. And so I could take the girls for treats. They could come to my house. I made sure that my house was a safe space, that other moms felt their daughters were safe. And so they could come and play. I would take them out maybe to Disney as a group. And she said, I made sure I built community for my daughter by me being the one who was offering to host, to do pickups and things like that. And I don't think I've nailed this completely, but I feel like I have deliberately sought out community, to ensure that my son is surrounded by cousins, or even just cousins who are friends, kids of friends, because of course, that's what we call them. But just making sure that he's surrounded by children his age, and he sort of has a sibling experience without necessarily, it coming from the inside of our house. So that's one. Asking others, asking the internet, picking things that are working for other people, and then doing the same for myself, for our house. Now, let me talk about some things I've learned off the internet that have been, and I really would recommend that you try them out as a parent. One, I learned this out of, I think my Instagram algorithm has super well aligned into the kind of content I like, and I get a lot of really good parenting content. And so one of the things that I learned was speaking about your child behind their back. This is complimenting them to somebody else while they are within earshot. And the studies show that even us as adults, when someone just compliments you straight to your face, it's nice, it's powerful. But if you heard somebody say some really amazing stuff about you to somebody else, but you are there, you weren't listening, but you kind of in passing heard, ooh, Wanjiro is so this or that, it would really just warm your heart a little bit more than if the compliment was said directly to you. And so it's sort of like gossiping, but the positive one, where you are deliberately saying good things about somebody, and then they happen to be within earshot. Now, how you do that as a parent is, if you have multiple kids, you talk about your child to the other one and tell them, oh, did you see what Keith did today? He was so kind. He was so thoughtful. They were playing football and this boy had fallen and was hurt, and he lifted him up, and he tried to dust him up, and then he gave him some of his water. Now, Keith, who is within earshot, gets to hear you saying cool stuff about him, either to his dad or to his sibling, and it just builds confidence, and it builds such lovely feelings of excitement in them and self-worth, And so if you have an only child, like I do, so you can do that by speaking to your spouse while your child hears, or, and I tried this and it has worked awesomely, talk to their stuffed animals about them, as long as they're within that age where stuffed animals or cuddlies are still a thing. I started doing this, I think, when Keith was like 3 or 4, and he has this bunny, purple dinosaur, if you remember the cartoon. And one day I just came and said, hi, Bunny, how are you? And it was bedtime. So Keith was lying right next to me, but I told him, shh, I'm talking to Bunny, you don't interrupt me. And I talked to Bunny, and I told him how Keith that day had done something awesome. And, Keith was just so excited to hear me speak about him. And it became some sort of a habit that I would do some days during bedtime. I hadn't realized how much he loved to hear it until one day he said, hey, Mommy, you haven't spoken to Bunny today. And he gave me his stuffed animals. So I could tell Bunny, cool stuff about him. And it's something I still do even now that he's 8, almost 8. And he loves to hear about himself when I talk to his friends and he's within earshot, or his dad, or even still his, cuddlies, stuffed animal. So that's one. The second was traveling with kids. So when we were about to move to Dubai, my son had never flown before. He'd never been an aircraft, not for a 30-minute flight or 45-minute flight, or even the 5-hour flight that we were going to have Nairobi to Dubai. And so what I did is I called a friend of ours who lives in the coast in Mombasa, and I said, can we come visit? I want to give my son a sort of aeroplane experience. And one of the things, again, I went to the internet, I Googled, I searched, parents would travel with their 2 months all the way to multiple kids who are under 10. What were they saying? What advice were they giving? And one of the things that I learned pretty quickly, and it was very useful, was that children mirror us. If they start to sense that you're anxious about something, then they're like, oh, that thing can't be good because even mom is not a fan of it. And so I learned quickly to make everything an adventure. And so, when we first booked that flight to Mombasa, all the way to, ensuring nap time is observed so he's not cranky, all of that, because back then he was quite young and so he still had nap times. But ensuring, for example, I give him the window seat. I tell him, oh, look at those are the wings of the aeroplane. Even something as sort of scary as a takeoff, and, just looking together outside and saying, look outside. Oh, the trees are moving so fast. I can't wait for us to be off the ground. Ooh, how cool is that? Do you hear your ears are sort of blocked? This is how you pop them. And this is why it happens, but just making everything sound exciting, like an adventure. Buying him a suitcase, a small carry-on, like with that. To date, by the way, he gets excited to pack and to drag around. The first few, to be honest, the first few times, you carried it. He was too little to drag it around long enough. He'd get tired easy. But just the fact that this is his suitcase that he packed for his journey, he got to bring snacks, all of those things is sort of like, it's exciting. And so by the time we did do the 5-hour flight to Dubai, this was not a new experience and he was already very excited about it. The second thing was sort of the kind of prep that you need to do when you're flying with kids. And some of the advice ranged from always bring your own entertainment and your own snacks or your own food. The point being that, while some airlines serve kids fast, by the time, you take off and you get to an altitude where food is being served, your child could be hungry. So you want to minimize any, like the experience is already not super pleasant, but you want to minimize any issues that can just be annoying for your child. And so ensure that you pack some snacks, foods they like, games that they love to play. So I've seen all of these really cool toys that sort of stick to the window, or maybe coloring templates or stickers, things like that. Again, age relevant, age appropriate, but just bring your own entertainment. It can be, for example, pre-downloading content on their tablets, especially the older ones, bringing them a nice set of headphones so that they can listen and watch. Why? Because some of the planes don't have, the whole screen thing going on, especially if it's a short flight, or again, before they take off, whatever it is may not be showing yet. Bringing the medicine in your carry-on just to ensure that in case there's a fever, you can manage it. Although, the stewardess are also super helpful. By the way, this is also something I picked up along the way. Be the really friendly parent, saying hi to the stewardess and the air hostesses, because you might need to be like, excuse me, can I get a cup of water? Excuse me, can I get, like, you might need to ask them quite a lot of help. And so just be the pleasant person. Of course, when they are younger, ensuring that either you get a night flight or where a portion of it they are sleeping. There's a lot of good technology these days where they, like I once got this pad that sort of connects to the chair. So especially when they're that age where their legs can't quite reach the floor, and at the same time sleeping is awkward. So it's like a sort of a mat that sticks to the front and the back side of the chair, and they get to stretch their legs and they can have a nap. So, so ensuring whether it's picking the flight correctly so that there's some nighttime and you sleep, or just immediately after nap time, or eating at the airport or close to, and then walking and tiring them out. So when they get on the aircraft, they sort of just knock out, at the very least, for a fair amount of time, So just those sort of hacks and advice that I found from other moms have really, really worked out. We still let him pack his own suitcase, drag it around now. He's much older, so he's more experienced with it. But, whether we've flown now, Nairobi to London is a much longer one. We've done, London back to Dubai and several other places that we've gone together. And he always approaches it with a lot of excitement. And regarding the topic of travel here, let me also share something that I have learned recently. I watched this Instagram reel where someone was saying that he started to ask his kids to be the ones that navigate through airports. And let me tell you, I tried it. It's going very well. And I think I will keep doing this for a while. My first travel experience into airports, I was already 20 something, probably 25. And just understanding this is where I check in and hand over my big luggage. I need to present my passport. What are the documents do I need? Do I have a visa to that country? Then I go through security and, taking off your shoes, removing your laptop, all of those things. And then after that, I have to find my gate and ensure that I'm close by and I'm on time for boarding. All of those things, and don't even get me started on connecting flights. I remember connecting through Amsterdam and heading through somewhere. And I think I had less than a 1.5 hour layover, and I'm sprinting across the airport. I've lost my luggage. Egypt Air. So I was heading to, I think, Madrid in Spain, and at some point, my luggage stayed in Cairo, and I had learned from my father-in-law, and I did not implement this, but he'd always taught me, always bring on in your carry-on, of course, other than your laptop and your work stuff, bring one set of clothes. So when you get on the other end and your suitcase is stuck somewhere, you have at the very least, and I was going for a conference and I was presenting at a conference, you have something presentable to wear before your suitcase makes it on the other end. But because I'd sort of done all of this as an adult, and I have this anxiety of millennials and airports and I was arriving 2 to 3 hours earlier because, you never want to be stuck in traffic or something else is going on and you'd get to miss your flight. With regard to me being in airports when I am older and a bit of that anxiety, I decided to try this thing that I saw on Instagram to prepare our son for flying. So this is what the Instagram post said. Let your child navigate the entire journey from the house. And so that's what we did. I think we were heading to Nairobi when we were still living in Dubai, and I gave my son the boarding passes and I said, okay, the airport, first of all, there are several airports in the UAE. Where do we go? Which the airport has many terminals, Terminal 1, Terminal 2, Terminal 3. Where are we heading? How do we know that? Okay, so we looked at the boarding pass together. He read the information together. So it's, he said, we clarified, we are flying Emirates. Okay, so Emirates, that's the name of the airline. Then where is the departure? So we are going to, Terminal 1, for example, or Terminal 3. And so that's what Papa will put on the Google Maps from the house to the airport, and then we'll get to the airport. Okay, or maybe we are taking a taxi and we'll tell the taxi driver we are going to Emirates Terminal 1 or Terminal 3. Okay, and then when we get there, we hand him our passports, and he's the one who goes and sits to the counter and says, "Hi, my name is Keith, and we are flying to Nairobi." And I have just loved this part because everyone is super friendly. They just are so kind. And so they say, hand over the passports, and he gives out the passports, and then he gives out any additional documents that he's being asked for. And then we weigh the luggage, and whether that's self-service or doing it at the counter, we do that together. And he sees how you tag the luggage. And then we do that, and then we ask him, okay, where are we going next? And he says, that's where the departure says we need to pass through customs and security. Okay. And then we put our bags, and we do that entire process. And when we get to the other side, we say, okay, how do we know which gate to go to? How do we know where our specific, aircraft is? The airport is huge. And then he takes us and shows us where our gate is. So he's learned how to read the monitors, and announcements, what time will boarding be, and all of that. And let me just say, it has been fantastic just to watch him go through this. And the goal here is that one day he may be able to fly by himself, whether that's as an accompanied minor, because a lot of these airlines have these options, or even when he's older and he's going to college or he's going for job things. I know for a fact that he will have a much better, less anxious time navigating airports. The final thing I want to talk about is chores and managing money. Again, this is something I have learned by just seeking out the information online. Some of these have been on Instagram, or on just generally YouTube, videos that I watched or things that I sought out. Sort of like list of age-appropriate chores for a 7-year-old. But for a very long time, I think while we were still in Dubai, we started to give him, sort of like the coins that get left over in my bag, and here you go. And that's because one day while we were in the supermarket shopping, he wanted something and I was saying no. And I said, I don't have a lot of money to spend today. And he said, but mommy, you just stop. because he had seen me, with my phone just tap, and he had not quite gotten the concept that, on the other end of that tapping is a bank account and the money leaves. He couldn't quite visualize. So I started to give him like 10 dirham, this money, let's go to the supermarket. And he'd go and he wants maybe some strawberries and some crisps, and maybe a third thing, he wants some biscuits or some whatever that is. And then he'd do the math and be like, ooh, it's 11.50. I need to give. So, and he'll tell me, and I'll be like, you have to return something. So we began to teach him the value of money, especially sometimes he's having to hand him a hard cash. He did end up saving for his first bike, which, by the way, he looked after so much better than anything we'd ever bought him. Keith is a very kind person. So he's the kind of person who shares his bike, even like in the estate when we still live in Nairobi. And sometimes it would be in someone else's house and it would be broken. And we'd have those constant conversations of take care of your stuff. But the moment he bought himself a bike in Dubai, that bike lasted so long. It was never out of his sight. And so that was the element of, learning about money. We soon started to see that the point he had gotten, 5 years, and giving him money for no reason was not making sense anymore. And so we started to do chores. And then, and we gravitated out of that into that, whether that was in Dubai where we still had a helper. And so it would be chores sort of like sweeping, putting away the dishes after they've been washed. And then now even moving to London where there's no helper, we have a chore list of the things he does. So of course he makes his bed, he does his homework, and he here in the house, he's the one who does dishes, the loading of the dishwasher, the unloading of the dishwasher. And so what we did is actually we deliberately put our utensils in the drawers that are easy to reach, so there's not a lot of opportunity for him to have to get a step ladder and then put away glasses that can break. So a lot of our cutlery and a lot of our plates and, cups, utensils generally are within reachable height. And so he's the one who does chores. And the beauty with us is that we've slowly navigated how much to pay him. There was a lot of negotiation because in Dubai, it used to be for every 1 point, that's the one chore you did today, we'd, round those up at the end of the week. And for every one chore, he'd get 1 dirham. Of course, when we came to London, that cannot be £1. That is way too much money for one chore. And so there was a lot of negotiating with his dad. And it was great by there for him also to develop those negotiation skills. But what has been amazing was for them then getting on an app. And so he can track the money that he has. So every Saturday, they do the math of how his week was. And of course, we don't pay for things, basic stuff like doing your homework. That's required of you. But we also try to balance out and make sure that we give chores. Like, for example, when you fold clothes, he gets his laundry basket and he puts away his clothes. Recently, I came across another Instagram reel, and I learned about something called Notice and Do, where you teach children to notice things around them, especially common shared areas where, that thing that's on the floor, somebody needs to pick it up. It should be you, so notice and do. So we've added that sort of as a weekly thing, if you've noticed and done stuff without nobody telling you. But consequently, what this has done is that it has helped us have discussions about money. And so he gets money, and he puts that aside, and he and his dad have this app they've been using, and he gets to see his money. They've been discussing investments. They've been discussing, money for giving away, and money for saving and money for spending. And so he's ended up buying for himself. So he got a PS5 last year as a birthday gift. And so it was on purpose. We said, the game, the PS5 itself, and one game, that's it. Any other subsequent game you buy. And so he's learned to be like, is that something that I absolutely need to buy or get? And then so he really looks after his money very, very diligently. He checks out how his investments are doing, and they track it together. Again, this is just constantly stuff I'm seeing on the internet. I know this is probably going to be a part 1, but I just wanted to do this episode sort of in marking the fact that my son is turning 8. And so these are some of the things that I've done in the sort of motherhood journey that has worked. And I hope that sharing them with you, you can try 1 or 2 of those. I love just learning from other moms and being deliberate in the working of this parenting journey. It's the same way you take a course. You take a master's, or you'd take a coding class, or right now I'm trying to learn about AI. You take a class and stuff like that. Take some parenting classes, learn online, search, Google, ask ChatGPT, do whatever you need to do so that your parenting can get better and better. Thank you so much for giving me your time. I hope this was useful and that you picked up a couple of things. Have a good week. Bye-bye.